Lying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
And welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. And we just had elections yesterday. I personally did not vote. No one worth voting for. Will you pick third party? I tend not to vote for a master. I believe you get what you vote for, so you know, they always claim, you can't complain if you don't vote, and I kind of agree more with George Carlin on this one. No, if you're voting for these people, you're the person that can't, complain. I'm the one that's not saying that we should have a ruler. So you can play it both sides, but I kind of want to start off with maybe some positives on it, because I do think that if there are true libertarians and freedom-minded people out there that do run for office, they can help move the country towards a freer society. But eventually they would have to fire themselves. But I have one here out of Reason.com. Free staters win at least 15 seats in New Hampshire State House. Libertarian leaners win many more. Yesterday I wrote that many libertarian-leaning candidates seemed well on their way to seats in New Hampshire legislature. Well, it looks like a good number of them arrived safely. According to Ian Freeman of Free Keene, at least 15 explicit free staters, a record number, will be ushered in as lawmakers in the 424-seat body. Many more candidates from both major parties endorsed by the libertarian-friendly New Hampshire Liberty Alliance will also take seats. Writes Freeman, according to a handy list compiled by Free State Project Watch, a project by pro-state group Granite State Progress, at least 15 people they allege to be Free State Project participants have won the 2014 general election. This is huge news. The previous counts of free staters in the State House were 12 in 2010, 11 in 2012, and now at least 15. It is impressive that so many have won elected office already. And the official move for the Free State Project has yet to even happen. And it says here, Well, side note, the Free State Project move doesn't officially start until we reach 20,000 participants, and we're currently over 16,000. So they're getting pretty close. It's interesting that Freeman relies on a list compiled by opponents of the Free State Project, but it's true the busybodies can be annoyingly well organized, and people are often more strongly driven to number their enemies than count their friends. Freeman adds the majority of New Hampshire Liberty Alliance endorsed candidates won tonight as well. About the later group, Dick Desrosiers, chairman of the Hampton Democratic Committee, complained last month that they dominated the New Hampshire legislature and introduced and passed legislation to remove any and all government impacts on liberty and property rights and diminish the importance of protecting and promoting the common good. So that out of reason.com. So there's change going on. I don't want to say that voting is completely useless, but I think that you have to have those people there. You have to, have a community of like-minded freedom thinkers to achieve that. That's why spreading the message, I think, is more important. Because if there's no one out there spreading the message, then you're not going to, have these people that might go, hey, freedom might be a little bit better than tyranny. One here out of 10th Amendment Center. Arizona voters approved proposition to reject federal acts. Phoenix, November 4th. Today, voters in Arizona approved a ballot measure that follows James Madison's advice to stop federal overreach, with 80% reporting the tally held steady and increasing at 51.49%. Approved was Proposition 122, a state constitutional amendment that enshrines the anti-commandeering doctrine in the state constitution. The language amends the state constitution to give Arizona the ability to exercise its sovereign authority to restrict the actions of its personnel and the use of its financial resources to purposes that are consistent with the Constitution. This language is consistent with the advice of James Madison, who wrote in Federalist number 46, should an unwarrantable measure of the federal government be unpopular in particular states, which would seldom fall to be the case, or fail to be the case, or even a warrantable measure be so, which may sometimes be the case, the means of opposition to it are powerful and at hand. The destitute of the people, their repugnance and perhaps refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union, the forms of the executive magistracy of the state, the embarrassments created by legislative devices, which would often be added on such occasions, would oppose in any state difficulties not to be despised, would form in a large state very serious impediments, and where the sediments of several adjoining states happen to be in unison, would present obstructions which the federal government would hardly be willing to encounter. there's been other states that have passed similar things, basically nullifying federal law unless, it's commerce that crosses state line. I would have liked to see something like this passed in Utah. And it's good to see Utah finally get rid of, I guess you can say, the Democrats and the progressives out there. But will the Republicans that are replacing them be any better? That's to be seen. And something I am going to get into with the Bundy Ranch, but I'll get to that in a minute. There is something that I want to play, and this was Ron Paul on RT yesterday, and this was with Ben Swan. I'm getting this from benswan.com. Basically talking about the monopoly of a one-party system. And this is why I say it's really, you're not really voting for anybody. If you choose to vote, and there are people, like maybe up in New Hampshire with the Free Staters and the other Liberty candidates up there, you might have something to actually vote for, but there's places that even if you have a Libertarian candidate, the majority of the people will support one of the status quo, like Ron Paul says, one party. And let me go ahead and play this clip here.
Few politicians in U.S. history have had the kind of impact that former Congressman Ron Paul has. And Dr. Paul joins us now, live from Texas, to talk about this year's midterms. Now, Dr. Paul, thank you for being here. I want to ask you first and foremost, one of the untold storylines of this year will be the independent and libertarian candidates who have polled pretty high and have fought to break through so many restrictions. So what are you seeing?
Well, I think it seems like this will be a very good year, better than it has been in the past, but we're still locked in on this mentality, that people will think positively on these other options, but when it gets down to the wire, they say, I got to vote for the lesser of two evils, and they end up voting that way. So we have to wait and see if there is a breakthrough, which rather disgusting. I mean, this whole idea that a good candidate that's rating well in the polls can't get in the debate, that's where the corruption really is. It's a monopoly of a one-party system. They claim it's two parties, but it's a monopoly of a one-party system, and they don't even allow a second option. And what do they do with our young people? They send them all around the world, getting involved in wars and telling other people how they have to have democratic elections, and then they have the elections and we won't accept the people they elect. But here at home, we don't have true democracy. We have a monopoly of ideas that are controlled by leaders of two parties, and though they call it two parties, it's really a one philosophy.
Now, Dr. Paul, you were the Libertarian Party nominee in 1988 before you went back to the Republican Party and then made two presidential runs as a Republican candidate. Do you believe that in the coming decade we're going to see third-party candidates take national offices, maybe in the Congress, in Senate? What do you expect to see in terms of that, or do you think that's just still a long way off?
I think it's a long way off. I hope your suggestion is right, but they are very tenacious on clinging to power, and they're not. If a third-party person gets anywhere along, they're going to do everything they can to stop that from happening. So I think it's a tough job. I think everybody should keep doing it, the people who are sick and tired of Republicans and Democrats. And according to the poll, about 80% of the people are sick and tired of Republicans and Democrats, yet they don't go and opt out for another decision. So I think it's either working in that arena or working to try to influence both parties And I do a little bit of that because, when I worked for, more transparency of the Federal Reserve, we got a lot of Democrats and Republicans to look into this and support that position. So there's two ways you can do it. Fight for competition, fight to get rid of the monopoly of the Republicans and Democrats, or you try to influence people with ideas and infiltrate both political parties, because this is our problem right now is Republicans and Democrats both endorse Keynesian economics, and they both endorse foreign policy interventionism and the wars overseas, and that's why we're in this mess today.
Now, Dr. Paul, marijuana legalization is on the ballot in 3 more states this election cycle, with Alaska, Oregon, and D.C. looking at recreational marijuana. So what do you see in terms of the new black market created by overregulation and taxation?
Well, I think this is what's waking up a lot of people, and this is another tool that's available. The marijuana issue has been taken over by individuals at the state level and essentially nullifying the federal law. So that is another way to attack the monopoly system in Washington, D.C. And there's going to be more of that as time goes on, because I expect to see a time when there's economic chaos a lot worse than we had in 2009 and 10 with so much chaos, and people will have to resort to taking care of themselves and governing themselves at a local level. So I see some good signs there that the people are waking up. It's just that the political system is so hard to crack that all of a sudden we're not going to see fairness in the elections and allowing people to get on the ballots.
But Dr. Poirier, let me just reiterate the last part of that question there, because yes, I agree with what you're saying in terms of what the states are doing, but at the same time, we do have an issue where in a lot of these states, there is an overregulation of marijuana, and the taxation is so high that, for instance, in Colorado, they're creating somewhat of a new black market for people who say, well, I can't afford to go through this the way the state is doing it, and it's still illegal for them to grow it themselves. So at what point do the states wake up, or do individuals wake up and say, you know what, we need true freedom here? Because right now, even with the laws that have been passed, there is not true freedom on this issue.
Right, and I think you're absolutely right on the point you're making. And that's exactly how they made marijuana illegal in 1937. They didn't just say marijuana is illegal. They put a horrendous tax on it, and that created the black market. Then they had to crack down on the black market. So, yes, immediately, if the regulations and taxes are too high, you're going to have a black market. Not in a year from now, you'll have a black market immediately. And I haven't followed that closely enough to know whether that's happening. But this is why you need people who will defend liberty in a purest form as possible. Because if they just say, well, we're going to take this away from the federal government and let the states do it, you have authoritarianism at the state level too, and there's all sorts of people who get behind these kind of movements. You take an industry like the alcohol industry might be behind it because they don't want any competition with marijuana. So yes, I think this is the case. And this is why you should argue the case for the purest case for liberty as possible, because there's a tendency for politicians, people in government, want to throw their weight around and use their power to overregulate no matter what the law says.
I appreciate what you said there about finding people who will defend liberty, you said, in the purest form possible. I want to talk to you quickly about ISIS. Now, this is not going to get a lot of discussion throughout the night, but in a lot of campaign ads around the country, we saw politicians who were talking about ISIS, and it was more of this politics of fear. Do you believe the country is shifting back toward this kind of war-mongering policy that Americans, we kind of thought they were getting tired of even as recently as a year ago? Are we slipping back into that politics of fear?
Yeah, a year ago, we were doing pretty well. We had built up a resistance against Obama, saying, well, it's time to take out Assad, and the Congress didn't go along with it because the people weren't anxious for it, and the thing fell down. But now, all of a sudden, because the whole foreign policy has backfired, and the radicals got hold of a lot of our weapons. They were able to show a lot of force in both Iraq and Syria, so therefore they can build up the fear. Just look at how did they get the American people to go along with a war against Saddam Hussein? It was build up fear, weapons of mass destruction. He's ready to kill us, and that was able to do it. So yes, they use fear all the time. And once again, if they had a strict principle of saying that we have no business getting involved in the internal affairs of other nations, stay out of entangling alliances, don't be the policeman of the world. Besides, we're broken, we can't afford it, and besides, the foreign policy is a total failure. It always backfires on us, and the people who promote these wars have an agenda and a special interest involved. The people need the information, but they can't get it from the TV. It looks like the war propagandists are very, very powerful. And you put the government together and the national media and so much else, they usually sway the people by building all this fear. And I think that the only tool we have is to do our best with alternative type of communication. And in particular, I think the internet is very helpful in that regard.
Dr. Paul, what type of ramifications do you think tonight's elections will have in 2016?
To make him what?
The ramifications of tonight's elections, the outcomes that we're going to see, whichever way it goes, how is it going to play out in 2016 then? What will happen?
Well, I think it's way too early to do that, but they'll talk about that tomorrow for sure, because I know that they started talking about the presidential race even 2 years ago. So I don't know. I think it's way too early. I just under the conventional wisdom of the people who will be elected today and the changes, I don't have high hope that anything is going to change. And for the most part, except with a few exceptions, and that there are some people there that are very, very good, but they're a minority, whether it's my son or Justin Amash. These people just don't have the clout that you need under current conditions to have a shift of total attitude. And so I think the status quo is pretty strong right now, and I imagine the status quo is going to win the election tonight.
Congressman Paul, we want to expand the conversation here. Now, the Center for Responsive Politics predicts that the 2014 election cycle will cost up to $4 billion by the time it's all said and done. However, nearly $1 billion of that is coming from dark money or donations by large-scale nonprofits that don't have to disclose the source of those funds. So essentially large donors who basically circumvent campaign finance laws. And joining us now to discuss with Dr. Paul, more about the money in politics is John Bonifaz. Now, John is the founder of the National Voting Rights Institute and an attorney and political activist specializing in constitutional law and voting rights. So thank you for being here together. We're going to expand the conversation so that all four of us can participate. But I'm going to start by asking you, John, almost $4 billion. That's a tremendous amount of money. So what's the bulk of that being spent on? And is it things like staffer salaries or, elocution classes, advertising? Where does it go? I mean, it's just so much, $4 billion.
It is an enormous amount of money, and I'm now actually with Free Speech. I'm now with Free Speech for People, which is leading a campaign to take on this whole question of big money in politics. But much of that money is going to advertising, saturating the airwaves and drowning out the voices of ordinary citizens. Congressman Paul rightly said 2 years ago, after a comment was made by Mitt Romney that corporations are people, my friend, that corporations are in fact not people, they're artificial creatures of the state. And yet the United States Supreme Court decided in 2010 that corporations are people with political speech rights, unleashing this unlimited amount of corporate dollars and big money dollars into our elections, exacerbating a problem that clearly existed before that ruling, but has made matters much, much worse. And that's why, frankly, we need a constitutional amendment to overturn that ruling and to end this system of big money dominance of our elections.
It's important for people to remember that the Supreme Court is not the final say on a lot of these issues. The people are the final say. But I do want to show you this chart. These are the top 10 contributors to midterm elections this year. Karl Rove, behind American Crossroads, which has contributed the most money, no surprise there, a little over $47.6 million. You have the Senate Majority PAC, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, National Rifle Association, kind of the usual characters there. But then you also have the National Association of Realtors, or the Next Gen Climate Action. Those are PACs that most people wouldn't expect to see.
Absolutely not.
Where's that money coming from?
John? Well, I think what we're seeing is the money's coming from both conservative quarters and it's coming from those on the left side who have significant funds to spend. But really, at the end of the day, it's coming from the top 1% of our society. Regardless of their ideology, we're talking about the wealthiest few of America who are dominating this campaign finance system. This is not a system open to all. The vast majority of Americans do not have the money it takes to contribute to candidates, to run for office themselves, and that's why we're keep seeing them locked out of the political process. The 99% of us are locked out of what is a wealth primary that occurs before the actual election, and that effectively determines what our debate is going to be about and who gets to compete and win.
Dr. Paul, I want to ask you, how do we fix this influx of dark money? What do we do?
Well, I see it a little bit differently. The money's bad, and we understand that, and we understand what it represents. But that, to me, is the symptom of the problem. Take, for instance, the military-industrial complex. That's the problem. And as long as you have a military-industrial complex, they're going to do it above the table, legally, illegal, or whatnot, but they're going to get their people in the Congress to spend more money and start more wars. So that is really the symptom. The same way with, the medical industrial complex, the same way with the educational system. They all have something to sell. So as long as government is so big, the money's going to be spent. The concern I have about attacking money per se is I want to undo all that. I want to make sure there is no special money in there, but I want to be able to spend money to do that. So why limit me and my right to spend money to lobby for reducing all this spending? So I think that you have to be careful on the regulations that you put, because if we had a constitutional government, if we had men and women of integrity that wouldn't take any of these bribes, you don't have to worry about it. But the problem is nobody up there cares about the Constitution, and they end up being there because of the money. So if you don't change the system and just regulate the money, you're going to regulate some money. You might regulate money for people who defend the Second Amendment, and I wouldn't be for that. So I want as much freedom of choice as possible in the way people spend their money, but I want to regulate the government. That's what I want to regulate, not the people who have a right to petition the government.
So, Mr. Boniface, let me ask you about that. Just kind of playing off what Dr. Paul was saying there. How do you fix the situation here, especially dealing with the big money, if you don't have any money or you can't spend money in order to fix the situation?
that is the problem.
Right.
American people
first off, I want to be clear.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I want to be clear, though, just in terms of the congressman's statement. I agree that there are a lot of reasons why we see all this money coming into the political process, and the lobbyists and the kinds of gains they're going to make for their own clients or for corporate America. But the fact is that if we have a level playing field where everyone is treated equally, where we have mandatory limits on overall spending, including on independent expenditures, then I think we can go towards that basic promise of political equality for all. We also need other changes. We need public funding of elections. We need greater transparency. But at the end of the day, we can't have a system in which only those who have the means, have the funding, can compete and run for public office or have their voices heard. We have to have that level playing field, and that requires mandatory spending limits. Now, in terms of how does a movement get built to take on this problem and build a constitutional amendment fight, I think we're already seeing it in 4+ years since the Citizens United ruling with very limited resources. 16 states have gone on record calling for this amendment, 500+ cities and towns. This is an issue that is cross-partisan appeal from Democrats to Republicans to independents. In the state of Montana, 55% of the people in 2012 voted for Mitt Romney for president. 75% of those voters voted for a ballot initiative that we were part of at Free Speech for People, along with Common Cause, calling for a constitutional amendment. So the fact is that there is, I think, an opportunity here to seize on that basic vision that all of us share as Americans, regardless of our political affiliation, which is government of, for, and by the people, not of, for, and by corporations and big money interests.
Now, John, I'm going to direct this question at you, but Dr. Paul, I'd like you to weigh in after we get an answer. Does this money really produce results? That's the big question. I mean, how exactly is a campaign or candidate bought?
Well, for a lot of people it is, but my answer is that, I was in Congress. The lobbyists didn't bother me. They never came. The big money, the people who had the PACs, they didn't come bothering me and say, hey, look, take this money. I'm going to get you in office. I mean, I went to the grassroots and got elected, and I think that's what we should do. We should have people who will go there and resist this temptation, and not the people have to wake up. If the people don't wake up and do something about it, and they listen to all the garbage they get off television, all those ads, there's enough freedom in this country for people to stand up and find the information more now than it used to be. And I just don't think that when we have a problem of too big a government, that the answer is making the government even bigger. I don't want that. I want an absolute right for you and me and anybody else to petition the government and have no regulations whatsoever.
Now I'm going to stop it there. That Ron Paul brings up something that the other guy keeps missing about the limiting the money, and if we didn't have such a corrupt government, maybe that could work. But it's up to the people. You have to be able to change the people's mind where, they can put whoever they want out there, and the most they'll get is a 0.5%. It's one of those things that you see the opposite happening. Republicans and Democrats, no matter who's in charge, have screwed up the country. Libertarians, Green Party, Independent, Constitution Party, can barely get a vote. That's really laziness. That's why we have such a corrupt government. That's why we have such a corrupt election system. It's just, we constantly see the same crap over and over, and it just gets tiring. I had let me see if I can find it here real quick. And this one was pretty interesting, and I've seen it from multiple sources. Let me see what pops up first. It's hard telling. If it doesn't crash on me. Okay, here we go. Looks like might be this one here. But O'Keefe, I guess, strike again. Many of you know he's the one that was going into Acorn, went into Planned Parenthood, snuck across the southern border, the northern border. He's shot down any notion that the government's doing what they say that they're going to do. Trying to find the interview here. Thought I had it right here. There. I don't know what's going on. Everything's taken forever. But apparently O'Keefe was able to go in and vote. Not once, not twice, not 3 or 4. He was able to go in and vote 20 times. And you heard that correctly, 20 times. And they say your vote counts. They say if you don't go vote, you can't complain. Knowing the level of voter fraud. Knowing that the whole system's a fraud. When you go to vote, you're validating what they're doing. That's how I truly see it. Because of the level of corruption. Definitely when you're voting for Republican or Democrat. Investigator allowed to vote 20 times. O'Keefe, Alex Jones, InfoWars. And I'm probably not going to play. Well, it's not too long, so I might let it play through. But here we go.
Infowars.com live election coverage. November 4th, starting at 6 p.m. Central. Interviews, analysis, and results. Go to prisonplanet.tv or watch the
surrounding Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina. And we walked into these poll precinct locations and simply said the names of inactive voters, and they told us, they offered us ballots. We did this a total of about 20 times, and everyone offered us a ballot except one. And that person asked to see my driver's license, which is against the rules. You're not allowed to ask for ID. But when they did ask for ID, I was unable to get a ballot. I was unable to get someone else's ballot. So we demonstrated that in-person voter fraud is possible. This comes on the heels of a report we did last week where a worker was fired, a campaign worker was fired for telling us to vote for non-citizens. And this comes 2 weeks after in Colorado, a worker was fired for telling us to go dumpster diving for ballots of African Americans to vote in their names. So we really have done a big series on voter fraud, and it's having an impact on these races.
Well, you demonstrated perfectly. You can go vote as people who are even deceased. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, anyone whose name is on the rolls, you could walk right up to the poll location, state their name, state their address, and you can get offered their ballot. You just have to sign the form. We didn't actually sign any forms because that would be a felony, but it is possible. There's 700,000 inactive voters. There's over 1,000 people in North Carolina who are registered to vote who are non-citizens. So this stuff is entirely possible, and the elections are so close, it could make a difference.
And when we talk about this voter fraud, it doesn't even have to be somebody who's necessarily not going to vote. Could it just be a circumstance where you get to the polls before they do?
Very, very well could be, and many people don't vote. You know, in Colorado, in the mail-in ballots, you know, almost half or 1/3 of those ballots are thrown away or discarded. And one of the officials in the video says, "Yeah, you should go fill those ballots out. Fill in those mail-in ballots. All you got to do is check mark someone's name and forge their signature, and you can. And congratulations, you're voting on somebody else's name." So it's possible. The Board of Elections is now investigating. It's really a simple ruse. We've done it before. We got offered Eric Holder's ballot 2 years ago. We went into Eric Holder's precinct and walked right up to the Attorney General where he votes, and the poll worker said, "Here you go, Mr. Holder." And, of course, we weren't Eric Holder, but they assumed we were because there's no photo ID. And then after we did this, they actually had a picture of Eric Holder put on his poll location.
Are you serious?
So they instituted, they verified identity for Eric Holder, but nobody else.
Yeah, I remember that one. You guys were like, "I'll be back faster than you could say furious." But, you know, it just shows how easy this thing is to manipulate. And people would say, you know, they try to criticize, say, well, you're showing people how to illegally vote. These people already know if they want to participate in these actions, how to do it. Because you don't, in the jurisdictions you're going to, you don't need a voter ID like you do here in the state of Texas. So let me ask you this. At any point, what surprised you the most? Was there a situation you said, well, no, we're not going to get away with it this time, or just something happened that you didn't expect to happen at all?
Well, the shock was, there's a couple of funny anecdotes. One time I was doing this in one of the areas, and I believe it was Durham or Cary, North Carolina, and I was standing right in front of a sheriff or a police officer, and he stood there right behind me as I was doing this ruse. Of course, I wasn't breaking any laws, but there's always the presumption they arrest you and ask questions later. Mm-hmm. And the police officer had his hands on the side of his body, and it looked like I basically said to myself, well, I'm pretty much screwed. He's going to arrest me the moment I turn around. So I turn around, I get offered this ballot, and I say, well, let me go out to the car and I'll be back. That was my excuse for getting out of the location. And the officer looks at me, and I'm expecting him to put handcuffs. He literally just walked right by me and said, he just said, hey, he was voting. I thought he was there to, stop me from doing this ruse, but he was just there as a police officer voting. There was another anecdote where the woman in the video actually does say, I need to see your driver's license, and I did not expect that. That was the one thing I did not expect, was for them to break the rules and do the right thing even though it was against the rules, and that's what stopped me from being able to get offered the ballot, was when she asked me for my ID.
What's the rule that she broke? That just simply asking for a photo ID?
In North Carolina in 2014, you do not need to show a driver's license. And in some of the cases when we said, I would say, do you need to see my driver's license? They would, almost like when you show garlic to a vampire, they would jump back and say, no, I can't see your ID. I can't see your ID. So the notion that someone actually asked for ID is wrong. In the state of North Carolina, you're not allowed to do that.
You don't have to wait till Election Day. You can vote all week. I mean, you can only vote once. This isn't Chicago now.
This election is
So, basically what Obama was saying in that little end clip, now you can go and vote multiple times. It's like Chicago. It's we know it's out of control. We don't have really any control over our government at all. It's gone that far. And like I was saying, I'm about glad that Utah has kind of switched sides, but Harry Reid and the whole Bundy Ranch thing and the damage he's basically already done is really just unbelievable. Out of the Washington Post, Senator Harry Reid's baseless domestic terror accusations. Harry Reid did it again. The Senate Majority Leader who called President Bush a loser and a liar declared former Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan a political hack and asserted that all Obamacare horror stories are untrue, has now called Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy and his supporters domestic terrorists. The comparison is as noxious as it is absurd. Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh was a domestic terrorist. The Unabomber was a domestic terrorist. Centennial Olympic Park bomber Eric Rudolph was a domestic terrorist. To equate Bundy and his supporters with these murderers is quite simply appalling. It was Federal Bureau of Land Management that provoked the confrontation, descending with 200 armed men, including some with sniper rifles, to seize Bundy's cattle on land their family has grazed since 1877. Whatever one thinks of the Bundy's legal case over unpaid grazing fees, the federal government's desire to protect the desert tortoise defending your property against a paramilitary force of armed federal agents is not the equivalent to blowing up a federal building or sending letter bombs. It would be easy to dismiss Reid as a buffoon with a chronic case of Liguria. But this was not a slip of the tongue on Reed's part. Video shows that Reed's first used the phrase domestic terrorist at a Las Vegas Review Journal event. He looked down at his notes just before he spoke the words. It was a carefully planned line of attack. Then, when he was asked during a Nevada TV interview a day later, what did you mean by that? He replied just what I said before engaging in an extended attack on the Bundy family and its supporters. Would Reed, the senior senator from Nevada, make such an outrageous accusation? First, Reed is defending the Obama administration from the charge that it used excessive force to try to seize the land. Most Americans recoil at the sight of armed federal agents training sniper rifles on a group of Boy Scouts, veterans, parents, and grandparents engaged in civil disobedience. But if Bundy's supporters are not protesters but domestic terrorists, then sending a federal force to confront them is not excessive. Second, Reed is defending his former staffer, Neil Corns, who presided over this debacle as the newly installed head of the Bureau of Land Management. Corns, who just 35 years old, was Reed's hand-picked choice to run the BLM. Lost my spot. Neil is just perfect for this position, Reed declared when Corns was nominated, adding that he really understands the role of public lands in rural America and natural resources across the West. In his first days on the job, Corns demonstrated that understanding by launching a paramilitary raid against a Nevada rancher. Corns tried to silence Bundy supporters by setting up First Amendment zones where protesters would be corralled and fenced in like a bunch of cattle. And he provoked an armed standoff that might well have resulted in the death of innocent men, women, and children. The only way his actions could be even remotely defensible if he was confronting domestic terrorists. Third, Reed is trying to discredit the critics of the federal government's actions as extremists, and by extension, all those who complain about the excesses of federal power. He wants to paint supporters of limited government as radicals so out of mainstream that they are now even defending domestic terrorists. But instead of painting conservatives as extremists, Reed is only painting Democrats as enemies of the Western way of life. The Bundy family's cattle have been grazing on these lands for nearly 140 years, only to see armed federal agents try to seize their cattle. Even before the Bundy standoff, there was a large movement afoot in western states to take back control of federal lands within their borders. Last week, more than 50 elected officials from 9 western states gathered in Utah for a legislative summit on the transfer of public lands. What's happened in Nevada is really just a symptom of much larger problems, said Utah House Speaker Becky Lockhart, who helped convene the meeting. It's time the states in the West come of age, said Idaho House Speaker Scott Becky. We're every bit as capable of managing the lands and our boundaries as the states east of Colorado. If Reed wants Democrats to be the party that responds to these growing calls for state control by sending armed forces to drive western ranchers off federal lands and seize their property, that is his choice. Calling his opponents domestic terrorists won't solve his political problems. It will only make them worse. So, people like Harry Reid have already done their harm. That's an article from April. Will you see the Republicans come out and start defending Bundy? Doubt it. Doubt it. Just don't see it happening. Will we see anything happen to reverse the path that we've been on? Or will Republicans get in there and only try to push more rules to maybe limit people on the left fighting back with more laws. Not every conservative is the same. Some conservatives are a little bit more liberal on certain issues. But will the representatives reflect that? I doubt it. I think they're going to pull the same dirty tricks that the Democrats did. And when it really irks me when the mainstream media comes out and says, you know, will we be able to get anything passed? What are you passing? More laws, more regulations, more burdens on the people in this country? That now the majority of the middle class and the poor don't see the opportunity to start their own business anymore. They're struggling to hold on to what they have. We've seen Detroit completely collapse, where we're seeing that other places. And people are, you know, you'll get that occasional, you know, that's why you should vote. Vote for the same thing that's got us here. And then, you know, people are libertarian candidate, you know, and I understand that. And again, you know, if you live in a place where that's possible, you know, where I live, you got to understand. Where I live, you have companies like Raytheon. You have military industrial complex companies everywhere. Technological companies. It's one of those things that these people work for these companies. They're going to vote for the Republican. Indiana is a pretty red state. And it definitely was really red. Indianapolis, I know, went blue, and I believe Gary, which I always say, Gary, give it to Chicago. Because everything that's wrong in Chicago just automatically bleeds into Gary, so yeah, just give that to Chicago. But if I seen enough libertarian people out there, which I know quite a few, but it's still you're in that like 1% tile that will vote libertarian. And a lot of the libertarian people out there just they're not going to vote for the Libertarian Party because they see the party system is part of the problem. So, you know, I don't know all the solutions. But I think there's one thing that's more important than these elections. And that's how you live your life. And I've said the Albert Camus quote multiple times, you know. The only way to truly live free in an unjust world is to live so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. And that's where the change comes, and at the local level. I think sheriffs are about the only thing that's worth voting for right now. That and county council, but the sheriff still has a high importance in that county to protect from federal intervention if you have the right sheriff. Okay, out of the Daily Mail. What landslide? Obama threatens vetoes and executive orders, including immigration reform this year, after Americans reject him by giving Republicans historic gains in Congress. President Obama came out swinging on Wednesday, just 14 hours after a Republican wave swept over the U.S. Congress in an election that largely repudiated his policies. Congress will pass some bills I cannot sign, he said, threatening to dust off a veto pen that he has used only twice in nearly 6 years. And he hinted at executive orders that will enrage conservatives. I'm pretty sure I'll take some actions that some in Congress will not like, he said. That's natural. That's how democracy works. Much reporters tussling with the president focused on executive orders related to immigration reform, what some Tea Party Republicans call an amnesty, which he plans to implement this year. He acknowledged that the GOP won Tuesday's election, but framed the results as a mandate for Republicans to work with him instead of the other way around. Obviously, the Republicans had a good night, he said. And how about this? I'll just play this.
Good afternoon, everybody. Have a seat. Obviously, Republicans had a good night, and they deserve credit for running good campaigns. Beyond that, I'll leave it to all of you and the professional pundits to pick through yesterday's results. What stands out to me, though, is that the American people sent a message, one that they've sent for several elections now. They expect the people they elect to work as hard as they do. They expect us to focus on their ambitions and not ours. They want us to get the job done. All of us in both parties have a responsibility to address that sentiment. Still, as president, I have a unique responsibility to try and make this town work. So to everyone who voted, I want you to know that I hear you. To the two-thirds of voters who chose not to participate in the process yesterday, I hear you too. All of us have to give more Americans a reason to feel like the ground is stable beneath their feet, that the future is secure, that there's a path for young people to succeed, and that folks here in Washington are concerned about them.
To feel like the ground beneath their feet is stable. To feel, he's sending his own little message here, and he sounds arrogant, They're saying that you need to work with me type attitude. Like, no, they're saying that they're done with you. They're done with you. No one's buying it. They're fed up. They're tired. They really just don't want to put up with it no more. And that's where the nation's headed, where they're basically pushing themselves out by alienating the rest of the people. Okay. What is that in here? Okay, there it goes. I have Gary Johnson talking to Ben Swan on RT. And what you're noticing with what all the freedom-loving people are saying, it tends to sound similar. And maybe Obama really should open his ears to what's really going on. But here's Gary Johnson on RT with Ben Swan.
Well, it has been a long road for many of these third-party and independent candidates this year, but this year is different. Maybe not in the end results, but certainly in the extraordinary measures to suppress their voices. To talk more about this is former New Mexico governor and 2012 Libertarian Party presidential candidate Gary Johnson. Gary, thanks so much for being on with us.
Great to be on. I hope libertarians do well tonight. Adrian Wiley, wow, I didn't realize that at the very end he's polling as high as he is.
He's done remarkably well, especially when you consider the fact that he was not allowed to debate, even though he had been invited to debate, and then that was taken away from him. I want to talk to you about some of these remarkable attempts to suppress these libertarian and independent voices. You yourself have been kind of subjected to this. How vital is it that these candidates get into a debate, have a chance to share their ideas?
Well, unquestionably, you can't be successful unless you're in the debates. Right now, we're suing the Presidential Debate Commission, simply saying that if you're on the ballot in enough states to mathematically qualify to be president of the United States, shouldn't you be included in the debates? At a minimum, how about be included in the polls that determines who's in the debates? And I have to liken the debates right now to Coke and Pepsi. Which one tastes better? Regardless of the outcomes tonight, nothing is going to change because Democrats are going to get elected or Republicans are going to get elected. And like I say, that's Coke and Pepsi. When you talk about tax reform, you know, Coke argues 30%, Pepsi argues 28% corporate tax rate. How about a libertarian in there saying, let's abolish income tax, corporate tax, and the IRS?
Gary, now I find it fascinating, you know, when watching most other national news coverages and pundits, they'll explain how close some of these races are right now, like in Florida, you know, we were just talking about that with the governor's race, but they refuse to acknowledge exactly why they are so close. And, you know, because in every one of these races, there's this third-party candidate creating disruption. What do you think of this?
Well, the best thing that could possibly come out of tonight would be libertarians are spoilers. That would be a great thing to come out of tonight because it would just draw attention to what libertarians are saying. I mean, libertarians really are hitting it on the head. Look, let's stop with the military interventions, tax reform, abolish the IRS. Marriage equality is something that we should accept. Marijuana legalization. Who's been talking about that for decades and decades? Libertarians. Balance the federal budget. I mean, really get the economy off the dime by eliminating income tax and corporate tax. As a result of tonight, you might see a real focus on, well, gee, so many libertarians did or achieve this spoiler ranking. What's it about? What's it about?
And clearly, Gary, there has to be then an opportunity, yes, for messaging, but also a challenge in terms of messaging, because the narrative that will be beaten over the heads of the American people by media and by, specifically, I would think, the Republican Party, will be that a vote for the Libertarian becomes a vote for, you know, X, Y, or Z Democratic candidate. How do you overcome that in terms of messaging?
Well, don't even fight it. Just take it on. Just accept it. Okay, I'm the spoiler, but really, am I the spoiler? Aren't I saying things different than Coke and Pepsi? You're going to debate over which tastes better? Look, this is a whole new taste, and we're in a world of hurt. We could be moving forward, but we're not. And like I say, bottom line result tonight, whether Democrats win or Republicans win, none of us are going to win because everything's going to stay the same.
Now, you know, if Greg Orman manages to win as an independent in Kansas, defeating Senator Pat Roberts, does that send a message to other candidates that the time for independence is right now?
I do think the time for independence right now. I think the best label right now is independent. I always say that running as a libertarian, I have the least amount of explaining to do. But running as an independent, look, that's the fastest growing segment of registration among people, and for a reason. Really, we're all independent. Let's stop with this partisan bickering. You know, come together in areas that you agree to disagree. But what's going on right now is just much to do about nothing.
Well, it absolutely is. And I think when we're talking about these particular races, you mentioned Republicans, Democrats, whoever wins, it doesn't really matter because there is no significant change. What I think is interesting is the collusion, and I'm sure you can speak to this as well, between media and politicians, especially when we go back to this issue of the right to debate, the ability to debate, and the ability to be included in polls, because it's media groups that conduct the polls. It's media groups who put on the debates, supposedly as, unbiased journalists, but it doesn't happen. There is so much collusion between the parties and media, and it's time that we break that system. How do we go about doing that?
Well, Ben, you hit it on the head. Running for president during the last cycle, the requirement to be in the debates was that you had to be at, say, 2% in A, B, C, D polls. Well, if you're not in A, B, C, D polls, how do you get in the debates? And then when your name does appear in the debates and you're ahead of those that are on stage or equal to those that are on stage, you know what? That's big media, and that's manipulation of the system in a way that goes completely unnoticed by everybody.
There's an interesting guy down in Florida as well, aside from Adrian Wiley. His name is Lucas Overby, and he's running for Congress right down there.
There you go.
And what's interesting about Lucas Overby is that during June of this year, Gary, he was polling at 30%, which is an incredible number. What's fascinating is if you go search right now, if you Google search Lucas Overby and the polls surrounding him, most of the sites that will come up show that his opponent, who's the Republican incumbent, is running unopposed because he doesn't count.
That's brilliant. I mean, that's just brilliant. What do you think of this, Gary?
Well, it's the reality. It's what's going on. It's you mentioned it earlier when they show the two candidates are tied at 45-45. Well, where's the other 10? Well, the other 10 is the third party, and they don't mention the third party. It's not fair. Things aren't going to change if this continues. I don't know if it has to do with advertising dollars. If it's it's so much an investment in the status quo, and so much an investment in let's not change anything because it's working for me. And I am talking about corporate America and crony capitalism. Hey, it's alive and well. I always point out, abolish the IRS. You know what? We'll issue pink slips to 90% of Washington lobbyists because they're there to garner tax favors. Do away, scrap the entire tax system, and start off with that fix. No more lobbyists. For a reason. There's no reason for them to be there.
Okay. Well, that was Gary Johnson. And, it's the same old thing. We don't seem to see any change. We don't really have any hope for change in these elections anymore. The whole, people not voting. Because why? To get the same old thing over and over. I don't know. Maybe you live somewhere where you believe that you didn't maybe have a fair election, that you did get a Liberty candidate into office. If you'd like to call in, 718-717-8296, feel free to call in. Phone lines are open. If you want to call in and talk about maybe your disgust with the choices that you're given in your local area, and what do we need to do as a society to become a freer society, to cast off the chains of government that essentially are holding us down? I believe we still have a certain level of freedom, and that's because there are enough people out there willing to live free no matter what, and they don't let people hold them back. But then those people are also called criminals. Then they're stuck on TV and treated like they're murderers and rapists for victimless crimes. So when you watch cops and this guy's got a warrant, we got to get him. Well, why does he have a warrant? Possession, intent to deal. Why did he get a 10th deal? He had an ounce. You sure maybe he wasn't just picking up from, extended time? How do you make that decision? And first off, if he's not harming other people, then why do you care in the first place? Well, it's political motive. It's money. It's the prison industrial complex. All the private prisons that basically they have a quota. I'll build this prison, but you have to keep it occupied. I'll employ these people, but you better keep this prison occupied. Same people that will lock you away are profiting off of your enslavement. For what? Possibly harming yourself, but not causing harm to others. And they want you to believe that your vote counts. How has that been working out for us? I'd say not too well. There's a level of freedom that I think people are comfortable with, even though they know it's not true freedom. I don't think we're anywhere close to that. I think we lost that a long time ago. Mitch McConnell, of course, he's still in there. We did have Alaska legalizing marijuana. Coming from Reason.com, Alaska becomes fourth state to legalize marijuana. Yesterday, Alaska became the fourth state to legalize marijuana for recreational use. With 74% of precincts reporting 52% of voters favored legalization, Alaska joins Oregon and Washington, D.C., which legalized marijuana on the same day. And Colorado and Washington State, where voters approved legalization in 2012. Alaska has taken a unique approach to marijuana since 1975, when the Alaska Supreme Court decided that the state Constitution's privacy clause allows people to possess small amounts of cannabis at home for personal use without fear of arrest or punishment. But that ruling raised an obvious question: where are people supposed to get the pot they are allowed to use? Measure 2 answers that question with a system similar to Colorado's that allows adults 21 or older to possess up to an ounce of marijuana at a time, grow up to 6 plants at home, and transfer up to an ounce at a time to other adults without remuneration. It authorizes state-licensed growers, cannabis product manufacturers, and retailers to be regulated by Alaska's Alcohol Beverage Control Board or a separate agency created by the state legislature. Alaska's tax will be $50 per ounce collected from growers. Think about that, $50 per ounce. That's just a tax. From the government's perspective, the advantage of that approach, which is similar to the way alcohol is taxed by volume, is that proceeds from a given quantity of marijuana remain the same as prices drop, which is what will happen as the market develops unless something goes terribly wrong. The disadvantage from a social engineer's perspective is that a tax based on weight does not take potency into account, unlike alcohol taxes, which fall more heavily on liquor than beer. In fact, a weight tax might encourage higher potency, especially as it becomes a larger and larger component of the retail price. If production costs fall as expected, Alaska's weight tax could amount to a rate of 100% or more within a few years, giving consumers an even bigger incentive to buy the strongest pot they can find. Measure 2 prohibits marijuana consumption in public, making it a violation punishable by a fine of up to $100. The initiative does not define in public, but the language probably will prevent people from legally consuming marijuana in any setting other than their homes. As in Colorado, the effort to keep cannabis consumption hidden will make enjoying the newly legal product especially problematic for visitors. Like Oregon's initiative, Alaska does not change the state's DUI rules, which current law blood test results can be used as evidence that someone was driving while under the influence of marijuana. But they are not necessarily conclusive. Alaska does not have a per se standard like Washington's, which makes drivers automatically guilty of DUID when the amount of THC in their blood exceeds a specific level. And there was update 94% of precincts reporting, and the vote is still 52% in favor, 48% against. And personally, I'd probably be against it. Not that I wouldn't want it to be able to. I just regulating it. We have enough problem with regulation. We're trying to stop regulating everything else. Why would we go? Oh yeah, well let's bring this in and regulate it. Trying to figure out how to say this the best way. It seems that a lot of people on the left, the socialists, they have been some of the big ones behind legalizing. So they go, look, you can tax it. Yeah, call for taxation. Great. They don't mind government being involved. But they will. This is still creating a black market. $50 for an ounce. And they try to kind of argue a point of why, maybe you should tax it a different way on potency. No. If they're going to do it, they're going to do it. Just stop with the bullshit. I'm not going to call for something else to be taxed when I'm trying to get the stuff that, I have to pay tax on D-tax. When I'm fighting against this so-called voluntary income tax, where if you decide that you're not voluntarily going to pay it, they could come to your house with guns and seize your property. If you don't pay your property tax, they can come seize your property. If you don't pay the mob boss, they will come with guns. And that's really what it is. It's extortion. So that's kind of where I go. It's it's something that I don't see the positives by legalizing it. I would see positives by decriminalizing it. And then you know what? If a company says, hey, because I can't properly test you to see, I can't afford to test you, blood test you, or, and it stays in your system, I rather, not have someone that's doing that. I think the companies can decide stuff like that. Just like companies decide they don't want the alcoholic that he might not be drunk, but he comes in and smell like alcohol. Or hungover. If you have someone doing other drugs, you as an employer have the choice. Me personally, I'd probably hire the person who smokes marijuana over the alcoholic. My experience with both types of people, let's say that alcoholics tend to cause a little bit more problems. And if a company's just outright mean, the people should have the choice to say, hey, we're not going to do business with that type of people, that type of a company. But you can't have government bailing people out. Okay. I had one more thing I wanted to play here. Again, if nothing freezes up here. It didn't play. Flash crash. I think. No. Just my browser going nuts right now. You're going to have to do something about that. Okay, I was talking about corruption and oh, it's just not going to play. I don't know what's wrong with this website. I might try to download it and bring it up Friday. Keeps stopping on me. So that's out of the question. And that's fine. Now, we have another Bush that's been elected. Out of BenSwan.com, Family Secrets revealed Bush dynasty grows with election of George P. Bush. Washington, D.C. Several political dynasties have existed in the history of the U.S., but perhaps none have been as controversial as the Bush family. Another George Bush is an election winner in Texas. George P. Bush, the son of potential 2016 presidential candidate Jeb Bush and nephew of former President George W. Bush won the Land Commissioner's office in a landslide. He became the first member of his famous political family to win his first election. And with Beltway insiders circulating rumors of a potential 2016 run for former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, a renewed scrutiny of the family is taking place, giving more insight to RT's Ben Swan and Aaron Aid is Russ Baker, author of Family of Secrets.
Now, throughout its history, the U.S. has seen several prominent families repeatedly produce notable politicians from their ranks. You have the Kennedys, the Roosevelts, the Tafts, even the Clintons. But many would argue that no political dynasty has been as prominent and as influential as the Bushes, just like Manny just told us. Now, joining us now to discuss the Bush dynasty is Russ Baker. Baker is an investigative journalist and author of the book Family of Secrets, The Bush Dynasty, America's Invisible Government, and the Hidden History of the Last 50 Years. Welcome, Russ. Thank you for being here. And I have to say, in preparation for this interview, I started reading some of your work, and riveting, really good stuff. I mean, I love it, so kudos to you. But I want to start off by asking you about the Bush dynasty and this election. Now, George P. Bush is expected to easily defeat John Cook in the race for Texas Land Commissioner. And now, George P., he's the son of former Florida governor and the grandson and nephew of two former presidents. So how has the Bush family managed to produce so much political might?
If you go all the way back, you'll find that for many generations, the Bush family has played a special role in political society, often fronting for the interests of wealthier, fundamentally more powerful people who preferred to stay in the background. And so we see now Jeb Bush and then his son and George W. and then George H.W. before him Senator Prescott Bush. Prescott Bush's father was in charge of small weapons procurement for the United States in World War I. So this is a family that's been on the scene for a very, very long time. They're absolutely brilliant at this, and they put major, major resources into making sure that they can continue to do this, and I think we're going to see them around for a very, very long time.
You know, Russ, it's such an interesting moment in American history because we have, if you go back to 1980, we were just talking about this. This is incredible. Go back to 1980, and since that time, we have not had more than 4 years where either a Bush or a Clinton was not at least a high-ranking member of an administration.
Well, 8 years with Obama.
Well, but we have a Secretary of State in Hillary Clinton.
There you go. So just high-ranking. Right? It's incredible.
So if you take that into account, going into 2016, it's very possible we could see a Hillary Clinton, Jeb Bush race. The hashtag tonight, not just two parties. At what point do the American people say, this is insane?
Not just two families.
Right. I mean, do you think the American people are getting sick of it, or is there enough time going by that they start to actually inherit this?
Well, the political dialogue in this country has been so degraded that I think many of us have retreated to viewing it simply as entertainment. And with the tremendous interest in celebrities and gossip and what have you, it's very easy to see politics as nothing more than that, which face we like, which we will see on our televisions for the next 4 years. And we do like to go up and back between them. I think this is very, very real. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if in 2020 we see President Jeb Bush running for re-election, and in Texas, a governor by the name of George P. Bush.
Now, Russ, you know, George P. Bush, he's fluent in Spanish, and he's made reaching out to, Republicans and Latinos this top priority of his. And immigration, it's certainly a hot issue. We've just talking about it before. But do you think this has been a prudent move, and will it produce results, more importantly?
I think it was a prudent move. I credit a lot of this to George H.W. Bush, Bush 41, who I think was quite masterful at identifying opportunities. The family has spread itself all over the country, and they've got cousins and others who may also be running for office, and they correctly identify opportunities. They rarely come out on the extreme conservative end of things, and whenever they see an opportunity, in this case, apparently Barbara was originally not too happy about the marriage to a Mexican, but I think now they're all counting their lucky stars because this has worked very, very well for them.
Well, just playing off what you're talking about there, Russ, interestingly, Jeb Bush right now, as you said, kind of ahead of the curve in terms of the Republican Party. I think he got some criticism from Republicans. What was it? He referred to illegal immigration, as an act of love. People coming here as an act of love for their families. He got a lot of flack from the Republican Party over that. But at the same time, he's certainly ahead of the curve in terms of trying to court that vote ahead of 2016, is he not?
That's right, and I think that the Bush game is always to try to occupy a portion of the conservative sector. It'll be a little tricky, though. With George W. Bush, he brilliantly played up the so-called born-again angle. And that really was what got him the conservative votes. We have to keep in mind the Bushes are fundamentally what you would consider to be moderate Republicans, and they're playing a long game. They're generally looking at the general election, and so they've got to be just conservative enough while also establishing those kinds of credentials they want to bring in November.
Now, Russ, many children of successful people, regardless to what industry their parents found success in, they tend to gravitate towards those industries. They're familiar with them, they know what's going on, and, many would argue that that's just not a bad thing. But is that the truth when it comes to politics? Should you try something outside of what your family has done?
Well, the Bush family, they certainly do go into various forms of businesses, but what we see is a lot of business opportunities coming their way from people who support the family politically. It might be nice, of course, to have people running for office who've actually been out there in the real world, but I just think that's increasingly a rarity.
Yeah, well, and I think, as you're discussing this, the idea that George W. Bush really played up this evangelical connection, and brilliantly so. He did so in his first term. A lot of folks won't remember, but in 2004, Karl Rove and George Bush played this game of trying to get the constitutional amendment on marriage passed. Evangelicals flocked to it. He got reelected and then never, ever mentioned it again. He was really done with it the day after his election. At what point does the American public start to see this family as kind of a group of actors in many ways? Or do they feel nostalgic in some ways about the Bush era at this point, as hard as that it might be to believe?
Well, you make a very good point. I spent 5 years researching the Bush family for my book and was astonished at what I learned and how much was not known about them, and how so many of these things that we think about them, for example, the born-again moment, and many of the others were actually carefully constructed fabrications, had little a basis in truth. And in fact, on the born-again issue, in Family of Secrets, I actually interviewed their advisor who crafted this whole plan to cast him that way. I saw memos and so forth. It's cynical, but it works. And sadly, the media in this country is so deficient that it prefers not to delve and not to ask too many questions about who these people really are. Who really is it that we're electing to lead the country?
Now, in your book, you've written that, quote, Bush 41's career in oil politics and diplomacy provided cover for a secret life as a clandestine intelligence operative involved with highly sensitive operations, many of them domestic. That sounds like a fantastic plot for a Hollywood screenplay. This just doesn't sound real. But can you tell us what you know about Herbert Walker that he was able to conceal from the public for so many years?
Yes, well, first of all, one of the things that interested me was when I began to try to figure out how somebody as improbable as George W. Bush could become president of the United States. I think a surprising event in and of itself. I began to look more at the father, who himself was an improbable president, not a particularly articulate or visionary individual. And then as I looked back at him, I thought, well, why was he named CIA director in 1976? And why, if he only served for 1 year, was the CIA headquarters named after him, of all people? The more I dug into him, the more I found out that he actually had unknown and unnamed credentials for that position, namely that he had been a long-time Central Intelligence Agency operative undercover while serving in all these other positions. And this goes all the way back.
I'm sorry to cut you off, Russ. That's incredible, but I have one final question. We have 10 seconds for an answer. Your book makes some pretty incredible claims, but I'm just going to ask you point blank, did Poppy kill Kennedy? Got to ask you.
You got to buy the book, right?
Well, I've got about 5 chapters in there on that.
Okay, so buy the book. I like it. Good answer. Well played. Good politicking.
All right, Russ, thank you so much.
So, we have basically the making of the Bush dynasty. Not really the making, the continuation of the Bush dynasty. The Clinton dynasty. We've seen the Roosevelt dynasty kind of peter out. We've seen the Kennedy dynasty basically killed or died off. But the Clintons and the Bushes, that's probably another reason I look at them so much as evil people to survive and to be able to create dynasties and the protection they have. They basically are true like dynasties, emperors. They have all the protection of the government. Both of them. And you wonder why these people keep getting into the top offices, and even though it seems like they hate each other, they tend to get along pretty well. Go baseball games. Oh, but I hate his policies. But it doesn't seem like they talk about policy too much. They hang out. They're boys' clubs and their box seats, and it's just the same old crap over and over. And it just really, it's annoying. It truly is annoying. Someone that's really been out there and have actually talked about, the whole, they fight in public and behind closed doors they share a drink together. Jesse Ventura, he's talked about that multiple times. And it should be most people, and it still seems to go over the heads of most people. And I just don't understand. I think that we should have evolved mentally past this whole thing. But again, we seem just to be stuck in the same old loop. And I have one here. If it's going to even load. I don't know if it is. There it goes. I don't know what the hell is going on there. But here's Jesse Ventura. Again, doing what everybody else is. Slamming the two-party system. Are we starting to get the point yet?
On the subject of voter suppression, we're going to bring in one of the most successful politicians in modern times to actually break through the two-party paradigm. We're joined now by former Minnesota governor and host of Off the Grid, Jesse Ventura. Jesse, thanks for being on with us.
Hi, Ben. Great to be here.
So let's talk a little bit about the third-party limitations here. I got to tell you, I just tweeted out tonight, using the hashtag, by the way, not just two parties. NBC News tonight is calling Adrian Wiley in the Florida governor's race an independent, rather than even mentioning that he's a libertarian candidate. They have it on the screen. It's a Republican, Democrat, independent. You know, your success in becoming governor of Minnesota was fighting to break through the system. Do you feel for guys like Adrian Wiley when he's trying to do the same thing here?
Well, you know, I wish him well. It's a very difficult task. You know, the main thing, the key to any election is being involved in the debates. If the Democrats and Republicans exclude you from the debates, you have no chance at all to win. If they include you in the debates, then you have the opportunity. That's what happened to me. I was polling 10% at the primary. I was included in the debates, and 8 weeks later, I got 37% and won the governorship of Minnesota because I was allowed to compete. Well, Democrats and Republicans don't want to see that again, so they eliminate any third option from any debates. And that's the key. You have to be in the debates.
And they keep sliding the line, the marker on the debates as well.
They keep sliding the line. And something that I found interesting, Ben, you brought this up with Wiley, and, you know, Jesse, I know you've had some experience with this as well. But part of me thinks that, you know, independent is now becoming a synonym for libertarian. Do you think that's the case at all, or not?
Well, I don't know. You got two brands of libertarians, too. You got the capital libertarians that kind of believe in anarchy, and then you got the small libertarian, small L, who understand that there's a role for government. They just feel that it's too encompassing and goes into too much of our lives. So I wouldn't say necessarily it's libertarian. You know, it's a difficult thing. When I won in Minnesota, we were at that time the mecca of the third-party movement. We actually had, I think, 3 or 4 parties that were considered major because you only have to get 5% of a statewide vote to be considered major. I tried to bring the Libertarians, the Greens, my Independence Party, all of us together. It was like trying to herd cats. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, good luck with that.
You know, they all had their individual agendas. And I said, look, we can all agree on one thing, campaign finance. None of us take the dirty money. Can't we build from there and come up with one candidate that we can all endorse, which instead of dividing our vote 3 or 4 ways, if we consume it into one, we're going to be a lot more successful. But it was so difficult, I just gave up on it because I had to do the job of governing.
It's a big job, too. Now, Jesse, there's a lot of talk about voter suppression in the media, but isn't our media part of that suppression when they don't talk about viable candidates, you know, kind of like we're discussing?
That's way more is them not talking about other candidates. We did a study in Minnesota, and voter fraud is virtually non-existent. Let me put it to you in layman terms. Have you ever met anyone who's committed voter fraud?
No.
No.
I haven't.
No. You have? You're the first person.
No, I haven't. I haven't. Yeah.
I haven't either. But yet I've met people that have drunk drive. I've met people that have been spouse abusers. I've met people that have robbed places. I've met all these other criminals. I have never once in my lifetime met someone who on election day went out and said, you know what? I'm going to try to vote in a different district and see if I can get away with it.
But you know, Jesse,
we're lucky to get 50% of our population to even vote.
Well, no, that's true. Let me ask you this. Fraud. Because election fraud, though, there are, you know, some serious, significant issues with it. Not in the way that media talks about it and politicians talk about it. We talk about IDs at voting locations, and that's all bull. We know that. But if we're sincere when we talk about it, there are issues like black box voting, electronic voting machines that could be hacked. I mean, there are significant issues that media never talks about.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. I was getting to that. I said, if there's going to be voter fraud, it isn't going to come from some poor person, down the street. And it's going to come major league. It's going to come through these computerized voting machines that can be hacked. And I believe there's already been major voter fraud with those hacked computer. People need to go back like Minnesota does with the individual ballots where you fill in the circle. Look at it this way. You've been doing that since first grade. If you're not capable of filling in a circle, you probably shouldn't vote anyway.
Well put, Jesse. Thank you so much for your time and your insight. It's always really fun to.
Okay, now I disagree because we did see where O'Keefe was able to get 20 ballots. And when you look at groups like some of these community organizers, Acorn and all of them, they kind of coach people on how to cheat the system. So I think there is that type of voter fraud. I think places like Chicago are probably more prone to it. So prone to it that Obama makes jokes about it. And we see that, hey, you can pretty much cheat the system 20 times. One person tried to ID him, which was against the laws where he was at, and he wasn't able to get a ballot. So I do disagree. And I still say, it doesn't matter in the long run anyways. Because the people that are counting the votes are already in control of the system. And that's left and right working together. That's your bipartisanship. When you hear bipartisanship, definitely from the mainstream media, what you need to understand is when they say bipartisanship, that means both sides working together to control your life. When we have bipartisanship, that's what tends to happen. You have your freak occasions that both sides might actually work together to do something good. But then both sides also work to push little things into that bill, that law, or whatever they try to pass, that kind of corrupts the whole thing. Bipartisanship screws you. When groups of people will work together to control the masses, it's not working for you. It's just not working out. And what are you going to do about it? First thing you do is live free. The second thing you do is you spread the message of freedom. Show people that freedom can be just as great and possibly better than what we have now. And just by gaining more freedom, and they have the ability to experience more freedom, will make anybody fall in love with freedom. When you have a true understanding. When you go, hey, I want to start a, small business, little retail store. When you don't have to go, I need permit here, license here, inspection here, another permit here, another license here, registered here, paid my dues to them, paid my dues to them, paid my dues to them, get a tax number, file with the IRS. Before you know it, you're just like, screw this. It's not that more Americans don't want to. It's not that more Americans can't, aren't capable. It's that so many roadblocks have been put in the way for you to simply make a living for yourself as a small business owner. It demoralizes people when they feel that they have the ability within themselves to be successful. But it seems that everybody has put the roadblocks in place to detour them more into servitude. When they rather see you as a serf than someone successful. Well, there is still opportunity. But it's extremely hard. And, you know, Glenn Beck has even talked about, well, I can't go out there and, you know, start my own cable company because it's cornered. We don't have the freedom that we think we have. Because there would be a lot more success stories out there if you did. But we need regulation. People might poison us, you know, put stuff in our food, and we might get, you know, sick from our food, and we might have factories that put poison in the air, and you know, someone might poison the ground and poison our food supply. Well, I'm sorry to inform you, we have a government that has increasingly gained power over people and added regulation, and now it seems that we have a monopoly on companies that do all of that. The food supply, whether it be Monsanto and their GMOs, or the simple fact that you'll have communities say, oh, you can't have a garden in your yard. You get slammed, and these big factory farms tend to be where the illnesses come from, when, you know, salmonella and whether it be beef, eggs, chicken, doesn't come from the little homesteader farmer or organic farmer. We're seeing this with the factory farms, but every time it happens, they tend to pass laws to regulate the homesteading or the small farmer or the organic farmer, not the factory farms. They regulate GMOs. Monsanto has a patent. They regulated it. There you go. Now only Monsanto can, you know, take that engineered seed and produce it, sell it. And if you buy it, they still claim it as property. Think about that. You buy a seed from Monsanto. You plant it. You get corn from it. They basically claim that that's still their corn. You can't keep it. You have to sell it. We'll let you have the money from it, but you have to sell it. Some of our seeds won't even replant, the ones that will. You get in trouble if you try to clean any of them and replant. Try to do that with a CD, maybe? You went and got your favorite artist and got a CD and you put it in your CD player and you're listening to it. And you turn it up a little bit loud where now the neighbor can hear it, and all of a sudden you get the cops knocking at your door going, yeah, the record company gave us a call, and you're going to have to pay a fine because you let your neighbors hear your music that you paid for. No. We live in an upside-down world, and it's time that we start uprighting it. And, you know, that's what I try to do on this broadcast. That's what I try to, you know, convey is we are all the same in one way, that we want to live our lives the way we believe is best for us. And as long as we're doing that in a non-aggressive way where we are respecting everyone else's rights and they're respecting ours, we don't need a ruler. That we can become a society that can eventually self-govern ourselves. And that's going to take a lot of brave people. And I know a lot of the people tuning into this broadcast are brave people. They are outspoken, definitely in the chat room. They discuss issues, and they're passionate. And in the end, they're seeking to be able to be free in their own lives. And we have great hosts here on UCY.TV that they give you informative information. They give you tips. They give you ideas. They are helping to expand the knowledge base. And that's something that we need. And the hosts on this network come from all different walks of life. But in freedom, we can be diverse. In freedom, we can work together. And we can share the beauty of diversity. That there is no one way. There's multiple ways. Because we're all individuals in the end. I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight, and I hope I shared some informative information, and we start truly questioning the two-party system. And then eventually the system itself. But we know that elections seem to be nothing more than a fraud. And right now we live in a world where we're having to deal with the consequences of this corruption and this authoritarian regime, whether it be Republicans or Democrats. And as long as more people take the conscious effort to live their lives free, and at the same time respecting and being a respected person within their community, will do more for the freedom movement, the liberty movement, than any of these elections. Because once society shifts, there's nothing this very minuscule minority will be able to do. Again, thank you for tuning in. Stay tuned. Coming up next, the Continual Condition live here on UCY.tv. Thanks again, and I'll see you Friday. Take care.